I want to ask you this question. It's the offseason, so everybody does their top fives, but you're such a historian. You know, if you ask me my top five Canes going into the year based on all things, right? Not just like who had the best pro career, who even had the best Miami career, just all encompassing what they meant to the school, their character, like leadership stuff, their actual ability. I would say top five in no order. I would go probably Jerome Brown, Sean
Right.
Taylor, Ed Reed, Ray Lewis, Michael Irvin, right? Just those guys. If you cannot have the Miami Hurricane as we know it without if you take any of those five guys out, it just fundamentally to me changes how you look at the Hurricanes. Does Cam Ward fit? And then not saying you're the same top five as me, but does Cam Ward fit in your top five after seeing what you saw this year?
To your top five, I love all five guys, and some of those guys would be in mine. It's still hard for me as a traditionalist to put a one-year guy in there. I'm still old school. I like to see multiple years. I like to see the guy signing the letter of intent and then getting his diploma from Miami. But again, that's not a world that exists anymore. Danny, in my view, if there's going to be a quarterback that you did not name in your top five, for me, it would not be Cam Ward, who's been unbelievable. I'll always have great feelings for him. But I've said this, I've tweeted it, and I put it up on your message boards. I think Jim Kelly is the most important player in Miami history. May not be the greatest, that's probably Ted Hendricks, but without Jim Kelly and the way he shifted this whole program before the national titles, he and Howard Schnellenberger are the ones that beat number one teams on the road. Keep this in mind. When he came to the program in 1979, they were losing to Florida A&M at the Orange Bowl. There was talk of shutting down the program. By the time he left, he had began quarterback U. Okay? I actually think the 1982 team, he talked to people that were there. If he doesn't bust his shoulder and Miami gets a few breaks on the road, they're probably an undefeated team. People don't realize how dangerous that team actually was. He started the tradition, and it was not Melvin Bratton, because Melvin Bratton actually told me, he goes, Steve, when Jim Kelly was playing for the USFL and we saw that guy making millions of dollars coming to our games, we decided we're going to do that when we have an opportunity. And then he became an NFL Hall of Famer. So to me, my top five, if there's going to be a quarterback that you didn't have, it would be him.
And it's funny. I talked to my dad, and if you ask my dad and some people of his generation, he'll say, yeah, Kelly obviously, like you said, started it all. And then as far as individual players in the Hall of Fame, so it's hard to beat that NFL Hall of Fame, right? So it's hard to beat that whole package. But in terms of like in the UM uniform, I know a lot of people will point to, and this goes to maybe the 2 years versus one, Steve Walsh is a name that comes up a lot, just in terms of what they did at UM over multiple years.
It's my personal favorite Miami quarterback, because when I really started to become a Miami hardcore fan, he was my quarterback. He was 23-1. To this day, I still think we should have gone for the tie at Notre Dame. I know people hate to hear that. I would have gone home with the tie. You turned the ball over 6 times. That would have been the greatest rematch in a bowl game, I think, in college football history. The Catholics versus Convicts, you could have put that on pay-per-view. You look at the 1988 season, guys. This is where Jimmy Johnson, I thought, did the best job of coaching his whole life. They had lost about 25, 30 guys to the NFL the previous 2 drafts with the 86 and 87 teams. Coming off a national title. So in 88, they actually played the number 1 preseason team in Florida State. They moved that game up from October to Labor Day Saturday. They ended up playing the Big Ten champion in Michigan on the road. Great comeback. They played
I was there. They
played the Southwest Conference champions with Steve Atwater and Barry Foster in Arkansas. Beat them. Beat a bowl team in BYU. They went to LSU, who was the co-SEC champions in Death Valley. Beat them 44-3. And they beat a couple of other teams that were pretty decent. They beat like 7 or 8 bowl teams, and then they lost to Notre Dame, and they ended up beating Nebraska, shutting them out or beating them 23-3 in Jimmy's last game. And that was actually a transition year for Miami, if you really look at it. And then Jimmy ended up recruiting a monster 1989 class before he left. So if I could do one thing over in the world today, I would put a horse head in Jimmy Johnson's bed, Godfather style, and I'd say, we like you too much. You ain't going nowhere.
Butch Davis too, man. You think about before, because obviously he eventually got older. So, but he won with FIU, which Mario did as well. That was really at the end of his career. But before that, within the, let's say, the wheelhouse of when he probably would have still been in Miami. I mean, he loaded that North Carolina roster with like first rounder after first rounder. Remember, like Quinn and all those guys. So
Marvin Austin.
Yeah. So he was
Bruce Carter.
Oh yeah.
Hey, guy, here's the problem though. And I was a guy. I was critical of Butch. I'm actually another. I coined another CanesInsight-ism, botulism. Yeah, he was like, as much as I like Butch, his game and clock management were baffling to me. Okay, but I've come around on Butch a lot. I understand the job that he did in rebuilding without a transfer portal, without NIL, very bad facilities, and a school president that was anti-sports and Tad Foote. It'll never be done again. The bad part about Butch's departure isn't that he just left. It's that we were stuck with Coker. I have been told, guys, I don't know what you were told. I was told by a really good source that if Greg Schiano does not take that Rutgers job and he was still on staff, the preference from Paul D and the decision makers was that Schiano was the young go-getter, that he would have and I think that would have been much better for Miami over the long haul.
Yeah, Schiano's one that, like, I remember when his name came up later on, right? Well after Coker, right? And he'd come up and be like, oh, Schiano, man, I don't know if it's a fit. Man, I saw him at practice. I was shocked. The guy looked like he was 30. The guy was jacked. He is an intense dude, man. I'm talking about this past spring. And obviously Rutgers, we've seen how they played. So, yeah, Tennessee, remember when he was hired at Tennessee and they had like a mini riot, and then the guy they ended up hiring didn't make it? Forgot who it was. But
well, guys, he had Rutgers at number 2 for about 2 weeks in 2006. And I get it. The year didn't end up great for him. You take Rutgers, I think was 0-12 his first year. And then 5-6 years later, they were actually better than Miami that season. If I had to do that all over again, I would say, Greg, why don't you stick around for a while? Larry Coker, it's funny, he's in the College Football Hall of Fame ballot. This was another mantra, that 53-9. That used to drive me nuts. You know what 53-9 meant when people would put up his record? That just meant a good coach would have been 57-4. I thought 53-9 was the most overrated stat in the history of Miami football.
And it was going down. I mean, he might have been 500 if he would have stayed. It was heading in the wrong direction there. But go ahead,
guys. Looking forward, the one thing I was thinking about as I'm preparing for this yesterday, if you go back to that golden era, 2000 to about 2003, okay, that was a great run. Should have had more than one national title. The one thing that stood out from that era that needs to be incorporated today, we are not fast enough really to compete at the national championship level, because I look at those players from that era. Santana Moss, incredibly fast. Sean Taylor, incredibly fast. Ed Reed, unbelievable game speed. Dan Morgan, incredible game speed. Andre Johnson, incredible games. Philip Buchanan, maybe the fastest cornerback outside of Dwayne Starks I've ever seen at Miami. DJ Williams, Jonathan Vilma could absolutely run. Kellen Winslow could absolutely run. The running backs, Frank Gore, Willis McGahee, Edgerrin James, and then James Jackson, all of those guys.
Shocking.
We had incredible team speed across the board. Last year, offensively, as good as we were, they could have really used the Travis Benjamin to take the top off the defense. And defensively, you saw they were probably a step slow at the wrong positions. That's the next step of evolution and development for this roster for Mario Cristobal. Got to get some more twitched up, freakier athletes.